Hi guys, hello. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever is applicable. It's Friday, it's the Gin and Tonic Show, and today we're going to have a really fantastic show because we're going to go to the beginnings of Islam, and then hopefully we'll be joined by Thinking Clearly, who is going to tell us a little bit about what is going on today, about reality today when we compare the United Nations Charter of the Declaration of Human Rights, comparing it with the Islam version of human rights. The I call it the OIC version, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Welcome to the panelists, the V, who's no Muhammad but Muhammad, and Allah is his messenger. There you
Hi
go.
guys.
No
Hope
Muhammad
everyone's
but Muhammad.
okay. Yeah, hi Robs, hi Stops. Hope everyone's okay. Hope the audience that are listening are okay too.
Good evening to everybody. Hope you're all well, and good evening to my fellow panelists.
Okay, if you're no Muhammad but Muhammad, what do I call you? NMBM.
You just call me Momo if you like.
Momo. Okay, Momo is good. Momo's good.
Yeah, as
All right,
always, if
everybody,
you're a
welcome to
Muslim,
the Gin and Tonic Show. What we are going to do tonight is, I think, fascinating. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, I mean, this is non-scripted, okay? So I'm just going to, from the top of my head, rattle off some things. And if I'm sounding weird, it's not because I'm high or because I'm drunk or something. I'm full of Novo Montamino, I don't know what it's called. Because like the typical old man, who's 70, who wants to be 30 again, jump over a little hill, get your foot caught in a root, fall headlong onto a concrete pavement, and then cut open your hands, your arms, your knees, your everything. And I've managed to break my arm, so I had to go to ER, and they took X-rays, and the arm was broken, and they wanted to put me into a cast for like 3 weeks. And I said, no ways. And they said, okay, then if you want to carry on showering and that, but then promise that you're going to keep it immobilized for like a week and then start exercising slowly. So I promised that, and then I was able to go. But I'm still under painkillers because there's a lot of shit going on in my body. So that's me. And I'm feeling, yes, it's okay. I'm feeling very sorry for myself. And of course, I'm the typical male
just
who, as soon as something goes wrong, it's horrible.
just imagine how the pavement looked after that, eh?
Well, I actually lost my sunglasses. I had to go back and pick up my sunglasses, but it wasn't complaining, so it's okay. All right, but if I do, then please bear with me. Then it's not there's anything wrong with me. It's just the painkillers or whatever speaking. So it's a live show, the Gin and Tonic Show. I mean, and there are different ways of participating. You can go to the live broadcast, like now, today. You can either go to YouTube or Facebook and watch it there and comment, question, query, criticize, whatever you want to do. And you can, if you have any real qualms, no, real issues or something with something that we are saying, you can join us here on the panel. No problem at all. We're always, especially if you're a Muslim, we always welcome any kind of live interaction with people. So it's not that, this is one-way street and us preaching down at the whatever from the pulpit. No, I actually like this interaction and communication with people. So you have the possibility. Then you can watch it later, and then what we can do is, oh, hang on, I can put this into the. I just remembered something. If I go to last week's show, then I can go and put the link into there because this is something that we have another possibility of doing that because then maybe Thinking Clearly can see it there because at the moment I have the problem that we can't get the link to him and he is going to give us the overview, the comparison between them. And this is why it would have been a good idea, but somehow this communication doesn't work using Discord. So let me put it here. Do, Thinking Clearly, reply. Okay. And there's me. Ah, shit, I'm logged in as somebody else, but I'm sure he's going to know what I'm talking about. All right. Thinking clearly, if you're listening, I put the link into last week's show, but this is my American ID, the Steve Lambert's guy. So there you go. All right, we focus on Islam because we know more, well, at least I know more about Islam than I do about other ideologies. Like, I'm not really that interested. I never was interested in politics. So, I never knew, for example, that fascism, that Hitler, the Nazis, were actually close to communism. Because I thought they were like far right as opposed to far left. And I had to change my mind because somebody showed me, no. They were actually quite close to communism. So I thought, okay. So it shows you how ignorant I am when it comes to politics and ideologies. So we address Islam, we critique, we don't attack, we use facts, reality, and reasoning, and we do not talk about individual Muslims when we do that, but the ideology. Now, of course, if a Muslim comes and talks nonsense, all right, like we will critique different videos that we have of different debates with people. So if I see somebody like Hijab, who is like a baby and a clown, I will call him that. But this is not an attack on all Muslims or something. This is different. So we condemn categorically any kind of abuse, misogyny, any kind of slavery, oppression, violence, anything like that. And we can, because our level of morality is much higher than that of a Muslim, because we do good not because we expect reward, and we don't do bad or not do bad because we are afraid of the punishment, but we are doing it from our own will, from our own personality, character, whatever you want to call it. And this is why I think that our level of morality, if you want to call it that, is much higher. So we embrace free speech and criticism, factual and constructive criticism if possible. And if you want to do that, then you've come to the right place when it comes to anything about Islam. Welcome to the chat, because we've already got people there who are commenting. Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for coming here and asking questions and commenting on stuff. That's very good. And the last thing I always have to point out, everything you get here is free. So there's nothing that you need to pay. You can't go to PayPal or Patreon or something. You won't find the Gin and Tonic Show there. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about history. We're going to talk about human rights, because this month we are comparing the Quran with reality. And there's a lot of like amazing things that we have found out so far. So the way that we work is we always have the news. Then we're going to see if we do get this lecture from Thinking Clearly. Otherwise, we will just proceed to the Quran. We'll cover the last couple of sentences in chapter 5. And then we will go to the theme, which is history in Islam. And then finally, we will have the Hadith of the day. And if this is not enough Islam, we can still go and discuss things on Discord, which is not being recorded. This is just for chatting. All right, news.
Yeah, I've got something, but you go first if you like.
No, you go ahead, fine.
Okay, so for those who are not aware, about a year ago, Cosmic Skeptic, he's a young man, he's an atheist, but a young man studying at Oxford, had a debate at Oxford with Muhammad Hijab. Long-time viewers will be aware of Muhammad Hijab. He's a 6'6" loud Muslim from Speaker's Corner. And so they had a debate, and Cosmic Skeptic was promised the footage, or there was a view that he would get the footage. He never got this. Eventually he got a whole bunch of provisos that had to be fulfilled in order for him to get the footage. He still never got
the restrictions.
But it turned out he did a commentary on his discussion with Hijab, and I'll link it for you here. So this is the first one. It's going straight into the live chat. So that's his hour and 9 minutes, not hour and 10 minutes response. If you watch that, it's absolutely devastating, right? He goes through it and picks up all the misrepresentations, the disingenuousness, and probably dishonesty with regards to hijab. Here is hijab's response to this. So the second
Oh,
link here is.
Rob, by the way, if anybody's interested, I critiqued this debate. So
Oh, did
there's
you?
there's
Okay.
a full, I don't know, 20, 30-minute critique of this on my channel.
Okay, post that as the fourth link then, Stops. Here's the third link in which hijab almost basically accuses Cosmic Skeptic of being racist. So if we rewind, obviously they had this debate. Hijab and his deluded followers thought that he did wonderfully. The rest of us saw clearly that this was a terrible debate from him. And Cosmic Skeptic left it, and then he did this long one, as you can see there, the first link that I did. That was about an hour and 10 minutes. And it was really well done, because he pointed out where hijab had mischaracterized him, cherry-picked and quote mined things, and then taken them completely out of context to make it appear as if he was saying something that wasn't, when in fact he wasn't. So one example was him basically saying that I'm granting you the first premise of the universe beginning to exist, but where might this have come from? And somebody might want to say it comes from nothing. And this was quoted as him basically saying that he said the universe came from nothing. Now, when you see the proper video, you see that wasn't what he was saying. He was granting the context. So that was one example, but there's about an hour and 10 minutes he goes into. Then hijab responded with a pitiful response, dodged certain things, tried to bring up issues that were of little to trivial points at all. So basically couldn't refute any of the main points, which was telling, because normally they'll have some tactics. And then in the third link there, basically accused Cosmic Skeptic of being a racist, because during a conversation with Rationality Rules, who's one of his atheist buddies, young guy, and they were sitting in his back garden, he basically said words along the lines of, so let's go with what Harris says. If we were to take people in cloth bags, women in cloth bags, and we looked at people in Somalia, we might suggest that that was problematic, or words to that effect. And so he was quoting Harris, who talked about women in cloth bags, obviously a derogatory comment about hijab, and he added the word Somalia. So hijab, in his red herring extreme extraordinaire view, took these two things together and said, well, I'm not saying that Cosmic Skeptics are racist, but that's like me saying, well, I'm not saying that Stop Spamming is a pedophile, but this is a poisoning of the well. And it's like, I'm not saying that there isn't a pink elephant, as if you can now not think of a pink elephant, right? As if this is somehow not being basically saying that he's a racist, but blah, 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 blah. And I've spoken to many sisters, and they are terribly insulted that he used this. So firstly, he was quoting Harris. And secondly, then he brought up Somalia, where 99% of the population are in fact Muslim. So it would be an accurate representation for the point he was making. And I spoke to somebody a little earlier today, and they sort of thought that they were on hijab's side to a degree. And I said, well, all he could have said, well, he could have used women in Saudi Arabia. Would that have been termed racist? Probably not. But because he used women from an African country, suddenly hijab tried to jump on this. So this is obviously race baiting. But go and watch those three links for yourself. So obviously, and hijab even took flack from some of his own Muslims, and some of his comments have subsequently been deleted off Twitter. So that was a little bit of the hoo-ha that went on a little bit earlier this week. And also then, I kid you not, then Sabua invited Cosmic Skeptic on a podcast to talk about moral nihilism, gave him like 5 minutes notice, said, hey, are you there? Can we have a quick discussion? So he did pop on, and they spoke for a good amount of time. Sabua didn't really say anything as substantive as we know anyway. But towards the end, I kid you not, and if I can find the video, I'll post the link for you. He equated Christopher Hitchens with Joseph Goebbels. And then asked Cosmic Skeptic, do you agree that Hitchens is basically like Joseph Goebbels? And when Cosmic Skeptic did not agree, this was, you can see a sense of bafflement. This was a sense of bafflement. How is it that Cosmic Skeptic couldn't see that Christopher Hitchens, with his polemic about the war in Iraq, was like Joseph Goebbels, who basically commanded and helped Hitler mastermind the killing of 6 million Jews? I kid you not. And you went, what? You can't see they're the same, or words to that effect, that sort of response. And at that point, I just, after face palming myself, I wondered, is this what Islam does to human brains? I mean, we've said it a lot, right? But for some reason, some people look up to sabur or hijab for some inexplicable reason. They're completely hypnotized and obviously uncritical in their thinking. But for somebody to suggest that Hitchens is the same as Goebbels, what more can you say? I think that says it all. So I think that was the two interactions with the IERA crew now that Cosmic Skeptic is saying. By the way, Sabur himself said that hijab had left Salam, which is this other organization, which apparently Ali Dawa collected £6 million for in donations. Hijab has left. He's now working in some capacity with or for IERA. So that's the latest news from my side.
Wow. Yeah, I wonder how this Salam business is working. And I wonder how this IERA is working. Because I'm constantly getting ads from them, and I'm getting, I don't know why, because I think I participated in one or two of their podcasts or their internet, I don't know, courses. And I think this is why I'm getting the emails from them. And this is crazy. How much money they are squandering on running around all sorts of countries trying to bring the people Islam. I mean, why does a tribe in the middle of Africa suddenly want Islam? And the best is if they don't know Islam, they cannot get punished. But now because they know Islam and they say, no, fuck that, we don't need Islam, now they can get punished. So I don't know.
It's a tactic. Do you not see it's a tactic? They're going to the most vulnerable places, the most impoverished places, and they're bringing gifts. What you're not seeing is, okay, you're seeing the propaganda about how these people are becoming Muslim, welcome in Islam. They've not heard it and they're accepting it straight away. But behind the scenes is the water, the clothing, and the food and such that they're using as probably a blackmail, or it's what was happening in the 18th, 17th century, I think, with what was known as the rice missionaries, where I think the Catholic Church was going over into Africa and trying to create Catholic encampments over there, and they'd bring rice over as a means of, well, become Catholic, you can keep your religion, you can become Catholic, recognize yourself as Catholic, and they'd use rice or food as a trade-off. So they were called rice missionaries. And when I watched that video as well, and the first thing I thought to myself is, this is a form of blackmail, it's a form of coercion. You're going to the most vulnerable people in the world, and you're taking the very things that they need, water, clothing, and food and such, and you're using that as a trade-off to compromise on their faith. That's despicable.
Yeah, this is true. And I called them out. I said to them, why can't you just go there? If they need something like clean water, why don't you give them clean water? Well, somebody says, well, they are providing clean water. I said, yeah, but only in exchange for being preached to. Why can't you go there without preaching? Why do you have to rejoice over 100 shahadas or something when, come on, in 2 weeks they're going to say, oh, look at these idiots. But nobody is going to keep this.
Yeah, but they're not doing it in the West, though, are they? So why are they going to the most remotest places in the world? Logic would dictate that if Islam is as true as what they're making the claim to be, you would go in your local demographic areas and recruit where the finances are better, the resources are better, and the numbers to accumulate and assimilate into your faith, so you can create more missionaries to go over and expand from there on. So you go, so like if you started in France as an example, you'd expand to Germany, you'd expand to Belgium, you'd expand to say Spain, Italy and such. And as you're expanding and in these countries of wealth and if you like the better means of such to sustain the preaching or the dawah campaign, then you would likely go over to these kind of areas. But to go, another reason that I came across as to when I was looking at this, these people don't have access to information. What do they know about Islam? So you can see why they've gone. Abdul Rahim Green and all these people have gone over there, because these people do not know what Islam is. They're learning it in a language that they do not understand. So they're repeating Arabic. They don't even know what the Arabic is.
Yeah,
you know,
so told about the negativity, right?
Sorry.
Well, they're not told about the negativity, although then these apologists will never say there's anything negative. But if they, like you say, Thunderous, if it was so good, why not go to the best Christian seminaries? Why not go to the best university or atheist hangouts and preach to those people? Because you'd be exposed for the vacuous claims that you make, right? So go, as you say, to people who are desperate, who don't understand it in a language, who don't have the time to think these things through, who really just need to survive day to day, and who will take whatever they can as long as they're not hurting other people. So they'll perform rituals that they don't understand just to get some food and water and so forth. So you're absolutely right. They're taking advantage of people instead of going to the strongest places they possibly could and see how the arguments stand up, because they know what would happen.
Yeah, it's also mathematical logic would dictate that you would start demographically in your own areas first before you reach out. For the very reason I've said, because the resources in Europe are going to be greater than the resources in Africa. So you would reach out to the local communities demographically, like you say, like, the Christians, the Jews, the atheists, the agnostics and whatnot. You would try and recruit from them because they'll have the better means financially to finance these and to sustain it as well. It's not a case of going over there, maybe create some kind of great propaganda video that we've recruited this bunch of people into Islam. You want to sustain it. I mean, the whole point of a teaching campaign from a religious point of view is you don't just go over to somewhere, preach to them, convert them, and then leave them to it. There's an ongoing, if you like, sustaining of, encouraging and whatnot, because the next generation, the next generation, the next generation that follows too have to likewise, if you like, study what the religion is, so that it builds up a community over there. They're going as soon as because these people have gone over there, they're not staying over there. They're too acclimatized to the Western style of living. This is just a pure marketing campaign, and by that what I mean is this: when Muhammad Ali fought in Zaire, he thought it was a great thing to do, go over to Zaire, the motherland, Africa, back to roots and things. But if anybody knows anything about that fight and whatever has read any books about Muhammad Ali while he was over there, he couldn't wait to get back to America. He couldn't stand it in Zaire because he couldn't stand how impoverished the hotels, the food, and whatnot, the creature comforts that he was so used to in America, he couldn't have in Zaire. So you couldn't wait to get back. So you can imagine that these people, they go over to these third world countries, great marketing, looks great and that, but you can imagine they're thinking to themselves, shit, I can't wait to get out of this country and get back home. I'm missing my iPod, I'm missing my PlayStation 4. So go on.
But it's not so much marketing. I think it's just a sales pitch. It's just they're trying to sell something and they're hoping the people will bite and then buy Islam. And for me, the whole thing is fundamentally flawed because why would you need to have to send human beings to some place to show them Islam? Wouldn't if a God wanted these people, while he created these people, couldn't he have made them to believe that he exists instead of having to send some idiot from our era, this Abdurrahim Green guy, this Polish guy, over there and tell them, listen, guys, I've got good news for you. There's a God. Come on. Really? And they expect us to believe this. So.
Yeah, but you imagine
Okay.
the Muslim audience in, say, Europe and the Middle Eastern countries. I'll be looking at that, and all they'll be doing at the notes on the in the comment section of these scholars for dollars would be "Mashallah, Bismillah." So wonderful to see Allah blessing these people. So you can imagine the comeback that they're going to get, which will only encourage and motivate them even more so.
Yeah, but there's so much wrong with it. It's amazing.
Of course.
Okay. A real action news item is that in Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran is at it again because the cyberspace, they have a cyberspace police chief. He has recently announced that, and this is an ongoing, it's a continuation of what happened like a year ago. So those who post unveiled photos, like girls, who post unveiled photos will be treated like criminals. More than 320 people have been arrested in connection to their Instagram activities lately. Now, I think we remember this. This was, I can't even remember when this was. Like a year ago? I can't remember. Oh, here it is. Yeah, no, it's actually more. It's July 18, 2018. So in those days, there was already this thing that women were being arrested, and the dancing that this girl does is actually amazing. It's really, really good. And yet, what they are doing now, they are arresting people who are sending videos of themselves to Instagram. And if somebody sees this, they go and investigate and they put them in jail just because they are not covered. And then they say, well, to people, well, it's an honor to be covered. And all the women say, well, it's an expression of my personality. And that's why I want to go and get covered. And yet, if they don't, well, this is what happens. So this is also a little bit, I don't know, in my eyes, hypocritical, right? Okay.
Yeah.
The next item, okay, now I wanted to have thinking clearly on, but clearly he's not here. Because what he was going to give us is like a segue into what we're going to be doing later. So we'll just have to wait a little bit. So let me do the Quran instead before we go to the theme of the month. What we're doing is we are reading sentences from the Quran. And what I am doing instead of what we did in the past, going through the pages, the sentences individually, word for word and sentence for sentence, what we're doing now is we're just sort of condensing the whole thing. And condensing, I mean, instead of the whole sentence, I just give you a couple of words just to give you the gist of it. The gist of it sometimes is actually like totally unclear. I do not understand it. But a lot of times I do understand, and I will just bring this here. This is our way of quickly giving you a summary of the Quran to show people, yes, we are reading the Quran. We are aware of what it says in the Quran. And yes, we can give you examples of where it is nonsensical, where it is completely, ineligible. No, illegible? Okay.
Unintelligible?
Whatever. Unintelligible, there you go. And this is sometimes it's really crazy. And we had some examples last week, I think it was, where we had sentences. I mean, it doesn't, okay. So let's quickly run through these. Jesus should remember, this is now chapter 5, sentence 110. If somebody wants to follow along on the original Quran and go and look at the sentences in the long form and then say, hang on, but what you're doing here, you're leaving out this and this, then please remind me or correct me. Then I'll update it here and now. Remember, these are things that I am reading and I am, well, not interpreting, I'm just looking, this is what I understand. But I suppose reading what I understand is sort of interpreting, so I am interpreting it. And this is what I see there. So if somebody has a different version, different idea, different whatever, please do so. So it's chapter 100. What just happened?
Sorry, it was me. I was bringing up the other screen so we can just swap between them like this.
Okay. Now
If
I
we need
understand.
to.
Thought, because I have this glitch sometimes where suddenly the internet will just bonk out for a couple of seconds. And
No, it's a sign from the almighty me.
Yeah, give me a heart attack here. So, sentence 110 in chapter 5 is, and chapter 5 is called the food, the feast again, is Jesus should remember. Rob, do you have this there just as an example, what I'm doing here, just so people understand?
Yep, there
So
we go.
this is 110. So you see, this is a whole long sentence. Which says, Jesus, son of Mary, remember my favor upon you, upon your mother, when I supported you with the people, the cradle, the majority, remember. So I put this as Jesus should remember, because all the details there of Jesus speaking in the cradle and creating the birds and things like that are not really that important, because they are mentioned somewhere else.
Can I just interject something? It says in that translation, Sky International, I supported you with the pure spirit. I'm using the use of that. It says Holy Spirit. I would like to ask a Muslim, what is this spirit? Because in Islam, you never hear of. I mean, I know in Christianity and other denominations and such, you hear this phrase, Holy Spirit, pure spirit, God's spirit. But in Islam, you never hear that. I would like to have a Muslim come on the show and can ask them to explain what is this pure spirit in the Sahih International, but in the Yusuf Ali Holy Spirit, can they explain what it is to me?
It's Gabriel.
That's just it. You and I both know from in the Islamic recension it's Gabriel, but why have they not put that in brackets then, if that's what it is?
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just
Yeah,
saying
it's
pure
quite funny
spirit or
to see
Holy
this
Spirit, right?
expression.
It's because they don't know. That's why. That's why. I mean, Stops is right. The normal response would be, or they have to, is say it's Gabriel. But if that's true, then why have the tafsirs and why have the translators? Normally, when they're trying to water something down, like for instance, beat your wife and they put it in brackets lightly, the spirit or pure spirit or Holy Spirit, why have they not put Gabriel in brackets or parentheses?
Yeah, because they probably, maybe they don't know, or they're just, I don't know what, maybe another error. Because you would think that if it is Gabriel, that's obviously clear to make, right? Jibril.
Yeah. This is what I'm saying. Normally, when you speak to a Muslim, they'll say it's Gabriel. Well, why have they not put Gabriel in the translation then? It's certainly
Well,
not there
why
in the
isn't
Arabic.
this in the Quran in the first place? Why use holy or whatever spirit instead of just
Yes.
you could have just said Gabriel? Why go this roundabout way?
Yeah.
The thing is, you see, this is where, yet again, where Muhammad was getting information and he didn't quite understand what the information was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and anyway, this shows why I am avoiding all this and saying the gist of this long sentence is Jesus should remember. So this
Yeah.
is how I summarize this, okay? The Reader's Digest version. And
Yeah.
111 is even worse because all it does is remember. And 112, remember. But this time it adds the food from the sky. Because in 113 it says, we're hungry. So 114 says, Dear God, please, and this is now asking Jesus to do this. So Jesus says, Dear God, please send us a table with food. This is where the name of the entire chapter comes from, the food, the feast. And God says, okay. So this you can go and you can pray in Islam for a table with food. And God says, okay. So how come there are thousands of children dying right now of malnutrition when you can simply ask God to send you a table full of food and everything that you need?
I think he says,
Exactly.
okay,
And most of those children,
go on then.
I was going to say, most of those children would be in Muslim countries at that.
Yeah. He says, okay, but if you resist or disbelieve afterwards, then I will punish you. So
Okay, I
maybe we
left
could
that
also
out. Yeah,
include-
true.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it doesn't, I mean, you see this everywhere. So I thought, no, why mention it? You see this so many times in the Quran. So I left that out. So God says, okay, yeah, if you want to pray, I will send you down a table with food. Now, are you telling me that a Muslim has never tried that? So where is this God if it's incapable of doing that? If it lets children die, instead of just sending them a table with food? They created, I mean, the creator creates babies knowing full well that they're going to die as babies due to the lack of food which he could easily provide and which he does provide according to the Quran. So there's, again, such a huge illogical twist here that Muslims simply will not see. Okay, 116, Son of Man or Son of God, Son of Mary. It's quite funny. You have different translations. They can't really sort of come to any kind of consensus of what this is, but it's supposed to be Jesus, all right? Where I don't know, do I need to explain this every single time? In Islam, you don't have Jesus, all right? You only have Isa, and Isa is the son of Mary. It's not, because in Islam, in Arabic, you always ibn something, so you are the son of a man. Except here, because here it's son of man in general, and son of God, which can't really be, because Jesus is not considered to be the son of God in Islam. So if you look at Isa, who is the son of Miriam, and Miriam in turn is the daughter of Imran and the sister of Moses and Aaron. This means that the Isa in the Quran is something like 1500 years removed from the events of Jesus, of the Christian Jesus. So there's a huge difference here. So
And she was a virgin for 1500 years.
poor girl.
The interesting thing is, it says there, this is the yet again where Islam gets the Trinity wrong. You see,
Yeah,
in
this is the next sentence,
in
yeah.
Christendom, it's the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or spooky. That's part of the triune Godhead. But here it's got Mary as God, Mary, and Jesus. But I've never heard of that. I've never
Yeah.
heard of it. This is the first occasion in my experience where Mary's part of this Godhead. Now, the interesting thing is, the whole Trinity thing came about probably in the 3rd century in the Council of Nicaea. So, and in that Council of Nicaea, they did not include Mary as part of this triune.
No.
They may have reserved Mary as a special position, but not in this equation here. So,
Yeah, but that was much later. That was only 325.
that's right. Yeah, but it's still 300 years before Islam.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah. Yeah, but for 300 years, they didn't really know what to do. And I remember that the Bishop of Alexandria, he was so pissed off he left. And this is where you have the Unitarians. Anyway, doesn't matter. But the point here is that you don't really have Jesus. You have Jesus, but you don't have Jesus. On the one hand, you have Jesus. So you have all the stories. But then on the other hand, you don't, because they say in Islam, he was not crucified. He was not this. He was not this. And the mother is the sister of Moses, which is much earlier. So, this is.
But also, this verse is saying, contrary to the Christians, that Jesus said he was not a deity, right? If you read the Sahih, which is just a bit more straightforward.
Exactly.
O Jesus, Son of Mary, did you say to the people, take me and my mother's deities besides Allah? He will say, exalted are you. It was not for me to say that to which I have no right, i.e., that he's not a deity. Because they're clearly saying that he's not the Son of God. So this is at least one verse where they will point to and say, no, the Quran says it. But okay, so what? Who cares what the Quran says? Why should we believe what the Quran says?
And then after Jesus says no, and this must be one of my favorite sentences in the Quran, and you can read along with Yusuf Ali. Now, if you, God, are all-knowing, you know I did not, you know I don't. This is what it says in the Quran. You try and make sense of this. I don't
117, yes?
16. I don't
160.
understand how anybody can say, oh, the Quran is of divine origins. Come on. Okay, the Sahih.
Can I read from the Yusuf Ali?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Because it's actually quite bizarre. It says, you know what is in my heart, though I don't know what is in yours. For I know in full all that is. For you know all that is. What? I'm trying to make sense of it in even flipping. In what language can that ever make sense in? And why would you say that? The thing is, yet again, what I don't understand about these kind of like points that the Quran brings out is this is the book in heaven. This is supposed to be Allah's speech. What is the relevance of that? If it's a book for all eternity, how does this verse here mean anything? How does it sort of like improve someone's life, or makes it makes them closer towards God? I don't get the point of this.
Presumably, as follows from the previous verse, to show that Jesus was not God, according to Muslims, because God knew what was in his heart. He didn't know what was in God's heart. And so maybe it's partly that to say, hey, he was a prophet, but not the Son of God. Otherwise, he would know what God knows.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's just
a
one
very roundabout way of doing it.
Yeah, but even if he was the Son of God, he still would not know what's in God's heart. Even if he was the Son of God. I mean, if I don't know what's in my dad's heart, and I'm my dad's son.
Okay, but I do know. It's blood.
Yeah, but I would have thought, though, Thunderous, that Jesus would know if he's the Son of God, that he'd know what God knows if he's part of the Godhead.
Exactly.
But that's would have been my.
This is what they're trying to stress here. He doesn't. So he's not a good, not a God. This is exactly the point. This is only telling people, look, yes, we understand what Christianity is, but we reject it. We reject the principle of Jesus. We reject the principle of was it the triunal Godhead or whatever? So we reject all that. Don't say three. We had this already. And that is what they're doing here. They're just trying to hammer this home and repeat it again and again. Jesus was not a God. That's it.
And I think one of the reasons probably that this was the case is because if Jesus was the Son of God, then presumably he'd have the last word. And if you have somebody that comes after that has another last word, well, he's going to be rejected. So if you can paint Jesus as not being the Son of God, but simply a prophet, and then now you can come along and say, hey, but actually I'm the last one. But if he was the Son of God, well, hey, then he had the last word. You coming along afterwards, people are going to be even more suspicious. But if he was simply a prophet that didn't tell all the information, or it was quote unquote corrupted or recorded incorrectly, well, now you can come along and correct things.
Exactly. And Jesus doesn't trump him.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why when you go through the Quran, and we've looked at this before already in previous months, where Muhammad molds all the other prophets in the past in his image. You know, the struggles he has, he twists the story so we can identify with them.
Okay, we get to 117, which I think is another classic. I didn't say anything, except what you said, what I should say. So you worship both gods. Where God, I don't know, is this God the same God? I don't know. I don't understand the sentence. Any comments?
Well, I'm just trying to work out. Okay, so I get it says there in the last part, says, "You took me up." Okay, so that's the Jesus didn't die part. You were the watcher over them, and you are witnesses to all things. But the thing is, if Allah was watcher over them, those that he was watcher over watched Jesus die, which is contrary to what Allah is saying in the Quran. So how could Allah be watcher? Because when he uses in that context of watcher, it's almost like I'm watching over them to protect them, to guide them, to direct them. So if that's the context, why would he be watching over them in that sense?
Yeah.
When they're totally misunderstood the whole situation, which is contrary, because up to that point, the whole of Christianity got it wrong for 700 years. So why would Allah be watching over a religion that is contrary to what he's been teaching all along?
Yeah.
They've got it more.
Yeah, but now bring this into context with the beginning of the sentence. I didn't say anything except what you told me what to say.
Yeah.
And then it says, well, you need to worship God, my God and your God. So this is worship God, who is probably my God and your God, which is the same God. I think this is what they're trying to say, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think if it says there, never said I to them anything except what you commanded me, well, they couldn't have listened to him then. It must have been Jesus was speaking to thin air in the Islamic recension because nobody obeyed what he ever said. That's why Christianity and Islamic recension has been a failure for 700 years up until Muhammad came along.
Yeah, but this is not true. Well, it's not true. I mean, not according to the Bible, it's not, because according to the Bible, Jesus said, no, hang on. I know what you don't know, and I'm going to go up to my Father. And according to the Bible, this is what happened. And here they say, no, he didn't say that. Yeah, well, who are you to say no, he didn't, when the one says yes, the other one says no? So how do you believe the one or the other? They're just contradicting one another.
But the other thing.
Yeah, carry on.
No, finish your thing, your thought.
No, because I was going to say that the other thing, what comes to mind, that if you then go to the sentence, it doesn't make sense to then say to worship God, my God and your God. If there is only one God, then there is only one God. Then you don't need to say this is my God and your God and this is God. Doesn't make sense.
But he's saying that stops. He's saying that because what the Quran wants to make it appear is that Jesus is saying that the Muslim God and the Christian God are one God, and the Christians and the Jews are saying, no, your Allah is not the real God, or is another God, or isn't a God, and they want to bring him in to say, no, but he's your God and he's my God, aka he's the same one God, and you should worship him. So he's
Exactly.
been brought in at that, but they have to also say that he wasn't crucified, right? Because if he was taken up and he was crucified, that would mean that he rose from the dead, in which case the Christian claim would be true. So in order to avoid that, they have to say that he wasn't in fact crucified. It was somebody who looked like Jesus or some other claim about who was crucified. Because otherwise he would have died and been resurrected, in which case he would have at least then had a supernatural experience. And then it's more likely that the claims that he's the Son of God could have been taken more seriously, because Muhammad never did anything like that, right? So here you have a way superior prophet at best, or in fact the Son of God. So to avoid that, you have to say that he didn't die on the cross if you're going to make the claim that he was taken up. So he must have been taken up at some point without dying. But even if he was any other prophet taken up? In which case he seems to be the superior prophet. Why would one suddenly listen to Muhammad afterwards?
Where all prophets are treated the same way.
I'm so glad you said that, because had I said that, I'd have been accused of apologetics. You took the word wrong.
That seems to be
reticent. It's difficult for me to be reticent of stuff like this that I can clearly demolish. But Robs, I applaud you.
You'd
make a
118. Punish your slaves or forgive.
Oh, sorry. Let me just bring it up. Go ahead.
118 is punish your slaves or forgive if you have brawn and brain. So if you have both, then you will forgive.
Yeah, and that's basically almost what it says, yeah.
Then 19, the truthful will get paradise. And 120, which is the last sentence, God is super great.
But we notice in 119, if you notice 119, the actual verse starts off, Allah will say. So why is Allah speaking in the third person?
This happens a lot. I mean, come on. We've seen this so many times that in the middle of the sentence, it suddenly changes.
But it's almost like, it's one of those points where you have to kind of remind the audience as well, that rather than skirt over it. Yeah, the inconsistency of Allah splitting from first to third person perspective.
Come on, we've had
the way it's written
where
obviously
he says he will pray for Muhammad. Who's he going to pray to?
Yeah, that's another one, right? And then 120,
so 120 is super great, and that's it. And just as a matter of interest, the word God, I mean, you've seen this a lot now, is mentioned 869 times in this chapter alone. No mean feat.
Yep. Good stuff. That's the end of chapter 5. Reader's Digest version.
All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick rundown, and then we can discuss this. It's a pity that we didn't get the lecture, but what the hell, we just have to do without.
Do we want to bring in anybody that wants to join us after this stop? So at some point you just shout out and we can pop the link in.
No, let's just first do this. Do the introduction, everything, to see what we're talking about, and then
can you share screen on that, or it's a bit small on your icon there?
No, I don't want to. Sorry, cancel. Clark.
Or otherwise, just make yourself full screen, right? Your
like
there
this.
You go. Yep, that's a bit better.
Okay, what we need to always appreciate, if we look at Islam, Islam has a history. It didn't just fall out of the sky. It didn't just happen. Something happened before it. Now, we have to go back 2,000 years, and 2,000 years ago, this is what it looked like. We had we had the Phoenicians, where today's Gaza is. And then we had all Judea, we had so many different areas and tribes and things like that. And then along came the Nabateans. And they started an empire based on trading. And they set up camp in Petra, and they didn't do any expansion wars. They were not into any kind of, military threats and things like that. They were peaceful. They were just interested in trading, and they were just controlling the area due to their wealth, just to the fact that they were very good at trading, and this is how they made their mark. So what happened is the Nabateans, because they were so successful, they went and developed writing, they developed numbers, they developed legal, they developed their own laws, they developed their culture, they developed a whole lot of things. The way that this works is they were influenced, and you can see that the Nabatean kingdom goes quite a lot into the Near East. So they were influenced by the Indians. So this is where the Indian numbers, the numeral system comes in. And they were influenced in the north from the old Sumerians, Babylonians, and those people. And what they did is they combined things. So we have the Aramaic, which was then developed into Nabatean, and this then started resembling what we know today from Arabic. There were still some differences, quite significant ones, but they gave the region, and this is like they put their stamp on this, in the form of language, culture, writing, reading, stories, poetry, legal issues, everything. And we're still discovering papers today where we see that they had contracts where women, for example, had property rights. So it's not that, this claim is correct, where they say Islam brought everything, like the basic rights to women. This is not true, because we have documents from the Nabateans who prove otherwise, which prove otherwise. Okay, so the language that they brought in became the Arabic. Now, this is why we see the influence of Aramaic and, to a certain extent, Syriac. And this is why some of the words, even though they are supposed to be Aramaic, can actually be interpreted in different ways. So if somebody who studied Syriac will read some of the words in Arabic, will recognize the stem, the origin, coming from further north. And this is something that people, that Muslims don't like, because they say that the Quran was revealed, sent down in pure Arabic, and you can see quite clearly that it was not. Anyway, we see that the language, which was in those days, it was spread out because the Nabateans disappeared around the 4th century. So then you had Arabic, where the Arabic in for example, in Egypt was very different from the Arabic in Morocco, from the Arabic in Oman. Morocco didn't have it yet. So what happened is that you had different pronunciations, which is just the way a language is spoken, and dialects, which also contains different words. And this is what we saw at the time. So if we look at the development, we can see that the Nabateans are the ones who influenced the whole area. They are the ones that brought the language, they are the ones that brought the culture, and they are the ones that brought the writing. And then the Arabs developed this further, and now this is where we go into the 6th century. Now, there's a traditional account of what happened in the 6th century, where around 570, 571, we have the year of the elephant. And in those days, you didn't have numbers for the year. So it was any kind of particular thing like what we have today. Like chapter 5 is called food of the Quran, because in it there is the mention of food. And what happened in those days, they said it's the year of the elephant because something happened with the elephants. And the story goes that a huge army came from the south, and they went towards Mecca. Now, the funny thing is, in older maps, you don't have Mecca. But the oldest maps that I could find all stem like from the 16th, 17th century. I couldn't really dig up any older ones. There are some older ones. There are, like if you read in books, you get excerpts there, but they're not freely available. And you have stories, and none of them show Mecca. It's only later ones there where you have Mecca in there. Anyway, so this army came from, I don't know, the Horn of Africa, I don't know from where, towards Mecca. And then a couple of kilometers outside of Mecca, the elephant stopped. and they would not go. And this whole huge army was so discouraged and so disheartened that they turned around and went back south. And then God came around and he punished this army by sending birds out that which picked up stones so heavy that they were able to kill elephants. I don't know how you do that, but it's a story, okay? So this army of birds came along, picked up huge boulders, and killed the army, all the elephants, and every single soldier. And they said this was a couple of thousand people. Why an army of a couple of thousand people would turn around and away from Mecca just because the elephants didn't want to go? I don't understand, but I don't think I must understand. It's just a story. So this became the year of the elephant, right? So this army was destroyed by this peaceful, loving, just God. And in this year, Muhammad was born, and the mother, this is quite funny, when she gave birth, a light emitted from her vagina, which lit up the palaces in Syria. This is quite funny if you look at the seerah, the biography of Muhammad. So there's a lot of embellishment, I would imagine. So Muhammad was born, and then parents died, and he went to his grandfather. Grandfather died, went to his uncle, and apparently here he learned trading and camel herding, how to take camels and go into different areas. And suddenly, this is the claim, at least, that Mecca was on a trade route. I mean, today we know it wasn't, but for a lot of many years, people have just simply asserted that Mecca was on a trade route. I mean, it doesn't make sense. If you go, the sea is just a couple of kilometers away. Why would you go and drive camels over the mountains or through mountain ranges when a couple of kilometers away you have the sea, where you can just put everything on a boat and just trek up a couple of 100 kilometers, and you save yourself all the hassle? Which is what the Nabateans did, by the way. This is where they thrived, and these, I don't know. Anyway, so Mecca was on a trade route. And what happened is he was surrounded by pagans, and they were surviving by selling trinkets, by selling gods, by selling idol figurines. And the Kaaba, for example, was a shrine, and the whole thing was around this black stone that apparently was white when Allah sent it, and it must have landed somewhere in the area, which is why the pagans came and worshipped this area, because they found this rock that was sent through space, which was initially white and then became black with the sins of the people around it. So they developed some traditions. So these traditions we still see today, but we see the pagan origins of Islam everywhere. There's this tawaf, this circumambulating the Kaaba 7 times anti-clockwise, throwing stones at the devil, running between the hills 7 times, doing this 7 times, doing that sort of. So there's a lot of pagan rituals associated with Islam. So if we look into the history, apparently, this is the story around Muhammad. Muhammad went up to Syria. Muhammad traveled up and down between Mecca and Damascus and Baghdad. So he was, and this is what it says in the biography, he was trading weapons and slaves, and he got stuff. I don't know how he got spices from the sea, because Jeddah is just around the corner from there. I don't know how this is supposed to work. Anyway, this is the story that we're supposed to believe. Then he became a trader, and he was working for a rich widow who had a lot of standing. So she was rich, she was influential, and this is all when apparently there were no human rights for the women. Women had no rights, and then Islam came around and gave the women rights, which they obviously already had, because Khadija was one of the highest class in Mecca. So she took a liking to Muhammad, and she was a widow. The husband died. We don't know how he died, because in those days it was usually through battles, and that is how the men died. This is why you have this thing that men can have 4 wives, to make sure that the women do not get left out, do not get left alone. So if the men got killed in a battle, then they were taken care of by somebody else. So yeah. So this Khadija took a liking to Muhammad, and she was 40 and he was 25, and she married him. They lived happily ever after. Well, she died, and he was then single, and then he then took Aisha, and this whole story. I don't know if I have to explain this whole story, but according to the Islam legends and myths, he saw her in a dream twice, and he went to Abu Bakr. I saw her in a dream. You have to give her. No, she's promised to somebody else. No, but you have to give it to anyway. They married when she was 6, and then he waited, and then when she was 9, they had sex, and they lived happily ever after. But then what happened? Because Muhammad one day was sitting in a cave, and this was next to Mecca. Then he was said to have been meditating when suddenly a figure came, an angel. This is Angel Gabriel, and he squeezed him. I don't know how photons can squeeze a human body, but this angel could. And Muhammad got a fright, and he got a panic attack, and I don't know what. Then he was told to read or recite, and he didn't know what. And anyway, and then he got the first sentence of the Quran, and then he got more and more sentences of the Quran. And then he went back to his wife and said, "Listen, I've had a very funny thing happen to me." And she then went to her, I think it was cousin or something, or uncle, who was a Christian priest or something. And he said, "Yes, you are a prophet. So you need to continue doing this because great things will happen with you. Alhamdulillah, there you go." So he then started preaching Islam. And then what happened, he was going on the nerves of the people in Mecca. And he was endangering the livelihood because he kept on telling them, "Listen, you've got hundreds of idols and statues and blah, 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 but there is only one God." And they said, "No, get lost. I mean, we're making our money with this." So let me just go to the next map here. This is what it looked like at the time. So you had different regions, different areas, and we're talking about this region, the Hijaz, and this is where these people were living, and they were pagans. And Muhammad started preaching. They were annoyed with him because he was trying to get them to stop selling their idols, and they didn't, because this is how they made a living. So he became more and more obnoxious and started preaching more and more and started getting quite aggressive. So they said, "No, this has to stop because we are dying. We cannot sell anything, and he is endangering everything. We have to get rid of this guy." So they said, "Okay, we have to get somebody to kill him." And somebody warned him, "Listen, you have overdone it. They're going to kill you." And so he fled. So in some night, he decided, "Okay, tonight's the night I need to leave." So he ran away up north and ended up in Yathrib, which today is called Medina. Now, here the story is a bit strange because they don't really explain what really happened here. But the story goes that they had heard of him, and they were very happy that he came to Yathrib because he already had a name as a mediator and as an honest person and things like. But the story doesn't really explain how they knew this, what happened. There's some details missing here. Then he became one of the arbiters in Medina, and he then started fighting with the Jews. And as he was fighting with the Jews, he became more and more annoyed, and they became angry, and there was a lot of animosity, and this ended up in wars and wars and wars and wars. For some reason, here again, the story is very vague. It doesn't really tell you how this happened. But he decided to become a pirate. So what he did is he gathered some men and then attacked caravans and attacked settlements, attacked all sorts of things, and then just stole stuff. He was just robbing people and then distributing the booty to his men. And this is now something that you can read up in the Quran, because it says it's quite lawful what Muhammad did, that he was robbing people, was distributing the stuff to his men, and 20% went to God. And this is what it says in the Quran. So from the booty, God gets 20%. I don't know what a God does with booty, with what they were plundering. I don't know how this works. But this is the story that then Muhammad became more powerful. He was spreading the Quran, and he was telling people that they need to obey this, and he was gathering more and more people together. And then he died. We don't really know how he died. And the thing is that he became more and more powerful. I mean, he was, I think the richest dude in the whole area, because he had, palm farms and entire villages, and he had lots of, I think the latest count is he had 23 wives, each with a house, each with slaves, servants, and everything. And yet you have sentences in the Quran which say there was no smoke coming out of the chimney, and then Muslims interpret this as he was a very humble person and too poor to even have food on his table. This is why there was no smoke or something. So it's quite weird. But on the one hand, he's filthy rich, but he never built a palace, and this is true. Okay, but it's a funny fairy tale where he never builds a mansion and things like that. Anyway, so he now spreads Islam in this area, and we're talking about the Hijaz. We're talking about this Kinda region. Then he goes down to Yemen and all the way to Oman. Muhammad now dies. It's not exactly clear how, but apparently he was poisoned by a Jewish woman who didn't like him. And now what happens is that the people who take over from Muhammad are continuing his drive in exploiting people. So what they are doing now is they go and colonize different areas. So they spread out, and this is just 300 years later. So a couple of years later, this is a map from 570, where somewhere it says 750. So if you look at the maps beforehand, and this is from there it says this is from 565. All right, so Muhammad had died, had not yet existed, and this is the way the map looked. And then 200 years later, this is already what it looks like. So after Muhammad, they carried on, and they went and they occupied, they conquered country after country after country. And then they went from Arabia, they went to the west and to the east. From the west, they went at first to Egypt, and then, all the countries, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, then into Spain. And then on the other side into Persia, and then all the way into India, and then up north, where today we have things like Kazakhstan and things like that, in Chechnya. So it's actually amazing that if you look at the military environment, you see that there was a huge amount of warring going on. And the same way that the Visigoths in Spain were sick and tired of fighting, because there was so much fighting going on in Spain, and the same was true in Persia. They were exhausted because they had so many wars. And then along comes Islam, the Muslims, and they just basically take over. Now, there's one thing here that was incredibly clever. Unlike what Genghis Khan did, who just came, killed everybody, moved on. What they went is they took slaves, but they integrated them into the army. So they said, listen, we can kill you, sure, but we're not going to do that, because what you can do is you can go with us, fight with us, and you will get rewarded. And that is what brought this whole thing. I find it fascinating how the people followed and got their reward for fighting now along the Muslims, and then after a while they could drop out. But the thing is, because of the influence of Islam, because they were pagans and they thought, well, okay, it makes sense and blah, 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 and all the arguments that they had, they took Islam with them. This is why, after a while, because of the slaves that they took, because of this, and this is the only explanation, the only rational explanation that I have found, is that they had traders who came from all the way from Indonesia. And this is how Islam then went back, because they were trading all along the Indian coast, all along Persia, all along Arab coast and things like that. And this is how Islam got back to Indonesia, where there was no influence, there was no military influence. This is the only country where there was no military influence. All the other countries was all military all the way into India. So this was conquering. And a couple of years later, then, okay, this is the Umayyad period. Okay, so the first guy, Muawiyah, the funny thing is, if you go into the history, you would expect that after Muhammad, and then after the four righteously guided caliphs, when they took over from Medina, Muhammad went back to Mecca. They should have gone back to Mecca, which they didn't. But we don't have any kind of history text. We have absolutely nothing that will substantiate this. The only thing that happens is around the 8th century. No, sorry, the 7th century, around 640, 650, when the Umayyads came in. This is when we have the first really documented and substantiated texts. And this is Muawiyah. He's not in Medina, he's not in Mecca, he's in Damascus. Now, the following, the sons took over, the following Umayyads, then until you get to Marwan, who in my eyes is the real founder of Islam, because he is the one who built Al-Aqsa, for example. He is the one who built the temple, was it the Temple Rock? What is it? I forget the name now. This golden thing, which was not a mosque, but which was some sort of a shrine. And the way that if you look at the biography and you look at the hadiths of Muhammad, it says there that he went on this magic flying donkey thing. He flew to Jerusalem and landed next to the mosque, tied Burak to something outside, went inside and prayed, and then flew up to heaven and had his discussion with God on how many prayers a day and so on and so forth. Now, this mosque that Muhammad, who died apparently, allegedly in 632, was only built almost 100 years later. So we're talking 632 Muhammad dies, 721 this mosque is built. So there's a cutoff somewhere. So this, is it an anachronism? I don't know if it is. But there's something wrong here. Now, if you look at what Marwan does, if you look at numismatic, if you look at all the different inscriptions, if you look at all the different pieces of evidence, you will see that everything happens around this time, not around the time of Muhammad, but 100 years later. And this is something where, I don't know, how do you establish history? How do you establish what actually happened where and when? I don't know. So the only thing that we have is indications. And then once we go to the Umayyads and then the Abbasids, then we start getting more and more written accounts of what happened. And then we can see how the Muslims took over Egypt. And then when Amr was sent in there, what they actually did, how brutal they were. And they actually destroyed the lighthouse because somebody told them, because they wanted, they were trolling them. They were telling the Muslims, yeah, sure, you can tell Omar that under the lighthouse of Alexandria, this is where we store all our gold. So they bloody well went and destroyed the lighthouse just to see if there's gold underneath the foundation. Of course there was nothing. But this is how stupid they were. Anyway, then they went all the way, and then this whole thing fell apart. Because if you look at, for example, Spain, if you look at Al-Andalus, you will see that there was not one sort of a caliphate. What happened is it broke apart. And then you had the regional caliphs who were then in charge of this. And they were then too far away to be controlled by, by the headquarters in Damascus. So they did their own thing. This is where you suddenly get variance in Islam. And then what happened then, we talked about this last time, Queen Isabel and Prince Ferdinand drove them out. So then in 1250 or 48, 1248, I think it was, they drove them out, and then all the Moors, Muslims, and everything were driven out of Spain back into North Africa. And then in India, they were never ousted from there, because they did not have a. And what happened is the Muslims went into France, and only Charles Martel then managed to get another couple of kings next to him, because they were fighting each other. This was quite common in those days. And they then formed one alliance and drove the Muslims back from France back into Spain. And they never went any further. Then everything fell apart. And then the Ottomans took over, and then Turkey, for example, became a part of the caliphate as well. And then these are the different languages that you had at the time. Just to show you, just to give you an indication of this claim that Arab is the one language that was spoken in all the areas. So this is total nonsense. This is not true. Anyway, but then we see that Turkey, for example, Turkey never spoke anything else but Turkish, and they abolished everything in Arabic, because when Ataturk came around, he said, no, we're not going to have Arabic, we're going to have European script. And so different countries did different things. The Persians had their own variation or variety, or whatever you want to call that, of Arabic, which is very similar. The numbers are almost identical. And from the influence of the Muslims from the Arabian Peninsula, it radiated out all across North Africa, and then into Persia, and into Afghanistan, and then into Pakistan, and then to a certain extent into India. And that's it. Then the Ottoman Empire, it crumbled. There was simply too much to manage. The area was too big, and they didn't have the means. And then what they took over from the Romans, this then 100 years ago was destroyed. Then the Europeans took over, and then split up the lands, split the countries into the borders that you see today. That's why you see so many straight lines everywhere, because they did this just on a green table. They just decided, let's do it like that. Okay, there you have the whole history of Islam in just 15 minutes.
Great job. I guess the question is, what is the Arab account of that, or what is the Muslim account? If that's reality, what is the general account that does not match reality then?
Okay, all right. And now it gets complicated, because if you go and you look at this old map, and you see here, for example, you have, you can't see the mouse. Mecca there's a little dent halfway on the left, or something like this. If you go look at the descriptions of Mecca, they do not match what we read in the Islamic accounts, because there's no valley, there's no stream, there's no second valley, there's no agriculture the way that it is claimed. Now, Yathrib or Medina, there you can still see, if you look at the photos of like 100 years ago, you can actually see the old irrigation lines that they had, because it used to be an oasis. If I go to the photos that we have of Mecca, it does not match in any way what we have as a description. So if we look at reality of Mecca, it does not match the claimed Mecca. So there we have a disconnect. Now what we have to do is we have to see, can we substitute this? And there, unfortunately, no, we don't have sufficient information. And of course, Muslims are blocking this. So you can't go, I mean, they're destroying all the evidence as much as possible. So you can't go and do any excavation into anything in Mecca itself. And the people who did said there's nothing under the foundation that would in any way indicate that there ever was a bigger city here.
Can I just confirm something on that point, particularly with attitudes towards foundational digging for buildings and such between, say, the Western world and the Middle East and Muslim-controlled countries. I don't know if many people remember, but in England, I think it was about 8 years ago, they found Richard III's body, or skeleton, or remains, however you want to put it, whilst digging a car park. I think it was in Coventry or Leicester. I mean, this is how the Western world, when it's going to dig somewhere or put foundations down for a building, they'll actually have archaeologists there, so that in case, as the diggers are going in and they dig something up, the archaeologists will be there to see if it's of any importance, anything that is found. But the Muslims are doing totally the opposite. They do not want any archaeologists there, because they know, as they're putting the foundations down for these absolutely massive buildings that are there. So you can imagine the foundations are quite deep. There's nothing to be found. And because there's nothing to be found, what does that tell you? It means there was nothing there in the first place. If there was nothing there in the first place, that means the whole narrative of Islam is false.
Well, at least as far as the archaeology is concerned.
I guess what we need is a Muslim to come on and give us their account and why they think that's not true.
Well, you see, you can't, because the only thing that you have is the documents in the Sirah. The Hadiths don't really explain much. So you only have Islamic texts which tell you anything about the region, about the area, about anything. And then what you have is reality. Now, reality you can check. You can look at photos. You can see, is there a valley? No. Is there a stream? No. So you know what reality is, and now you compare this, and there's a disconnect. So, I mean, how can you carry on? You cannot adjust. I mean, I know they're trying to do that, but you cannot really adjust reality to fit what you want it to do. It's impossible, yet they're still trying. But you can't.
Yeah.
So anyway, this then. Oh yes.
What's that?
Now I'm dying here with this stupid arm. This then, if you take that and you say, well, hang on, then we need to look at this from scratch. We need to look at this from a different point of view. We need to abandon the text that we have from Islam and take only what we can verify. Then you have some very, very strange things, because then the Quran, I mean, it mentions, for example, the fruit being, like on the market, which are being traded. And you have grapes and olives. How can you have grapes and olives in the middle of the desert? You can't. So you are already limited to the Fertile Crescent, which is 1,000 kilometers further north. Then you have very, very funny sentences in the Quran, which say things like, remember when you passed by the pillar of salt and you pass it by day and by night? Now, Tom Holland made this very, very good point, and he says, yeah, but hang on. If we look at the pillar of salt, what is a pillar of salt? Well, that's Lot's wife. So where would you suspect or expect, or I don't know, something about a pillar of salt? Well, it's somewhere along the Red Sea, along the Jordan River. Now, if you're passing this day and night, it cannot be what some Muslims are saying, well, they were traders, they were running around this area all the time. No, this is what you are passing every day and night. Not everybody was a trader. Not everybody is doing that, but everybody who lived in Mecca was passing day and night certain points. And this then must be somewhere, well, I don't know, to the west of Petra. Now, there's somebody else, Dan Gibson, who came up with a different idea. And he said, yeah, but hang on, if we look at the old mosques where they were pointing, and we take the direction of 3 or 4 of them, they should all go and meet up at one point. And they do, and that point is Petra, or close to Petra. So that would indicate, and for him it does, that the descriptions that we find in the various Islamic texts, and the fact that the old mosques point in this direction, that this old place that the Muslims were mentioning all the time and where Islam actually originates is Petra. This would seem to indicate that Petra is the place where everything happened. The other, the other thing is that there are mosques who don't, which don't. So there are some mosques which go like in totally different directions, and there are some other indications which would point to Dan Gibson not being right. So if we look at the history, it's very difficult to establish a historic narrative. There is a lot of speculation. Now, I don't maintain that the way that this is being transmitted, what I have said now, where the caveats are, and this is my personal interpretation. This is not something that I can substantiate with text, that I can go and show evidence that I can. No, because there is no such thing. There is no evidence either way. And this is what Rob just pointed out. If a Muslim comes and says, well, I don't agree with that, then what evidence does he have? None. He only has Islamic texts. And now somebody who is a Quranist is even of worse, because there is nothing in the Quran that tells you anything about the physical location.
Yeah, I mean, this was brought up in Speaker's Corner as well, and of course they resisted it, as I guess they have to, because otherwise it would show that, all the history and the documentation was profoundly confused and mistaken. And they obviously challenged Gibson's account of where Mecca was, etc. I think the other thing, and maybe it's... Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I was just speaking over you there, speaking my mind, that they have to... The Muslim parlance is that they have no choice but to challenge anything that challenges Islam. That's the default. They have no choice in this area, and this is just another avenue now. You do it morally, you do it scientifically, you do it through archaeology, you do it through history, you do it through previous revelation. Every angle or facet that Islam tries to find some kind of foundational credibility in, it gets torn down time and time and time again.
Okay,
Yeah,
but now, is there any kind of history? No. There are no historic documents. If I go and look at the language, how many times is the Arabic that we know from the Quran used before the Quran? And this is the funny thing, 0. Now, we have a couple of inscriptions, and I told you that there was a slow development from the Aramaic to the Nabatean version of Aramaic, with a little bit of Syriac influence, and this then transcended or moved or developed into Arabic. So there are some intermediate, species or whatever you want to call this, which sort of resemble the one and not the other. Because the cuneiform of the Babylonians, for example, is definitely different from Arabic. But the later Nabatean is very similar to Arabic. Now, how are you going to distinguish somebody who chiseled something into a rock, the one from the other? And there you can't. And this is why you see that the claims that some Muslims make, who say, well, yeah, Arabic has existed all along because here you have inscriptions which are 200 years older than Islam. No, these are just inscriptions which you interpret as being Arabic because they do look very similar. Absolutely, and I agree with that. But you cannot from this infer that because you have this inscription that Arabic was around 200 years before. You can't. So there's no text, there's no poetry, there's nothing around that would indicate that Arabic was actually around long before Islam. And there are some claims, and people in the past have actually accepted some of these claims and said, oh yeah, it does look like there were some forms of Arabic, but now they're finding less and less indications that how do you call this, the assigned authors are actually the ones that they had assigned to before. And this means that the more and the more evidence we get, the less likely it is that Arabic was actually in use before Islam. And this is the old theory of mine that just like Dante's Inferno codified Italian, the Quran codified Arabic. That was the version of Arabic that was used at the time. And then, of course, we get the different dialects then from Morocco to Oman and the MSA, the modern standard Arabic, the so-called Al Jazeera Arabic. So it doesn't matter what you look at, whether you look at the language, whether you look at the culture, it doesn't matter what you look at. It all goes back to Islam. It all goes back to the Quran. The only problem we have is we don't really know where it originated and when. So we have to only we can only take some indications. Like I said, if we go look at numismatic evidence, which is the coins that in the beginning when Muhammad showed up on those coins, they still had a Christian cross on them. Now, how does that work? How can you have a Christian cross and the name Muhammad? Now we come to a very interesting hypothesis, because then this means that Jesus, who was modeled on a previous spiritual, I don't know, entity, was being transferred all the way into Muhammad. That Muhammad was actually supposed to be the counterpart of Jesus, and that he was the one that was used as a template. So this is quite amazing.
The thing is, why have a cross on the coin if Jesus didn't die on one? So what does the cross represent if Islam teaches Jesus didn't die?
Well, this is why they said, let's take Muhammad, but there are too many similarities between them. You know, if I look at Moses, what happened with Moses? A lot of buha when he was born. Then he went into this funny wicker or something down the Nile. Then he was found by the who was it? Was it the wife or the daughter or something? So there are different stories in the Bible and Quran who finds him. So a lot of then for 50 years you have nothing, and then suddenly, you know, the Exodus and all this stuff. Now, if you look at Jesus, there's a lot of buha around his birth. Then there's a lot of quiet. Then there's one incident when he's 12, when he's in the temple. Then another, like, you have to wait another 20 years or so before something happens. And then he starts his ministry at the age of, I don't know, 30 or 32 or something. Now look at Muhammad. The same thing, a lot of buha during his birth, then a lot of nothing. Then when he is then, as a child, then the parents die and he goes to his grandfather. Then there's quiet for another 20, 30 years. Then only he starts reappearing as a prophet, as a messenger. So there are so many similarities in my eyes that, come on, this is all fabricated. These are all fairy tales constructed around, and I think they are constructed around real people. And I think we mentioned this a couple of shows ago, where there was Muslima, they had 4 different fake and false prophets, all doing the same thing, all running through the Arabian Peninsula saying that I'm the prophet, I'm the one who's got the keys to paradise, follow me, and da da da. They were all killed by the Muslims. But this is, you know, you see these indications, you see all these different things. It's only when you start putting up everything together and you get the bigger picture that you can actually dare to form a hypothesis the way that I've done now. But it's very difficult to substantiate any of that because there are only indications. But at least I have some indications where Muslims have absolutely nothing.
The other thing, Stops, I was just thinking while you were speaking, is the whole thing on the history of Muhammad, right? Because that's also claims about reality. That's presumably not something you do today, but maybe next week, or a show on that, right? Because you did a bit of a debate on Valley Stream, and shout out to Valley Vision G Block, who's in the chat at the moment. But you did a short debate on that, and the other guy just wasn't really prepared for it. And that's, again, a claim about reality. So presumably at the moment you're not covering that, but that's, again, something you could take, you know, a good hour or more, maybe multiple shows to go through all that documentation. I know you've at least sent it to me or shown it to me. So, and that's, again, you know, a central claim about the reality of this whole ideology.
Yeah, but you see, this is how do you differentiate between historicity and fairy tale?
Well, I think it's a case of in the case of Muhammad going, okay, here's the best accounts we have. How clear is this? Which is the point that you made in that debate, that this accurately points to the person that is supposed to be talked about with regards to the Quran, the Sunnah, Hadiths, etc. And I think that's one way one can do it. But as you say, history at that time is somewhat sketchy anyway. But I think we could take like the reasonable approach. What is most reasonable to believe about what we have, the information that we have? How reliable is the information that we have from that time, and how accurately does that represent the claims that are made today?
Yeah, and then you have this coin with Muhammad's name and the cross, which then throws a spanner in the works, because this completely, what was Habermas, the favorite expression, this upsets the apple cart. I don't know where he gets this from, but he uses that all the time. So this upsets the apple cart because all of a sudden everything is topsy-turvy. None of the things that you think are established really make sense. And then you have to start thinking from scratch, and you have to abandon everything that you thought you have already, sorted out. And because everything is totally different, and people can't do that. And this is why they remain with the fairy tale, what I said in the beginning. And this is the way that is propagated, and they're quite comfortable with that. Even though there are so many loopholes, there are so many things which don't make sense, there are so many contradictions, so many inconsistencies, and none of the descriptions match reality. So why does anybody do that? Why do they believe this?
Well, I think primarily it's been handed down, and as we've come across with many Muslims, it's a case of repeating what you've heard or what the Imam said. The Imam's heard it from somebody else. Very few people have actually checked into this, and those that have, either not going to represent it as you have, or they're going to ignore it, or they're going to try and reinterpret it in some other way.
Yeah, but I've also said several times over the years as well that those that probably know that this is false, but it's more than a religious ideology that's keeping them within Islam. But there's also a cultural pressure to stay within Islam as well. I can't be the only person that's brought up as a Muslim who, at the age of about 13 years old, could work out this is a load of rubbish. This can't possibly be true. I know I will not be the only one to have done that. So there are going to be many, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Muslims are seeing that this religion is false. But where do you go? That's the other thing. You can't just go to nowhere. For some people, they've got to cling on to something because you can't go to nowhere where there's nothing. Then there's the cultural pressures as well of the emotional blackmail, the financial blackmail, the psychological blackmail, the violent blackmail, and the death threat of leaving Islam is quite real as well. So I appreciate what you're saying. When there's nothing to defend Islam, why are people staying in it? But I've kind of seen it for myself sometimes, where it's not so much the religion that holds people back; it's the cultural pressures that hold people back, the family ties, the community that keep people shackled to it.
Yeah, I think there's all those additional things as well, isn't it? Apart from the not thinking critically and starting out with something they have to defend, which they don't really know much about, and then being told
what
what
they
to
do.
think.
Yeah, but they say you don't have much evidence for Alexander. And number one, yes, we do. And number two, it's not important because Alexander never made the claims that Muhammad did. So, there's a difference. Why would I go to a claim that Alexander existed? Does it change whether Alexander existed or not? No, it doesn't, because Muhammad is the one who influenced the world. Muhammad is the one who started Islam. Muhammad is the kingpin, as it were, of Islam. So you can't go and say, well, if your level of evidence or your standards of evidence are so low when it comes to Alexander believing that he existed, then you should apply the same standard to Muhammad. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, no, I do not, because there is a lot more to say about Muhammad than there is about Alexander or Napoleon or anyone whom they bring up. And the funny thing is, if you go and look at these people, there is more evidence because you have inscriptions, you have people writing about him who actually met him. There are people who give us accounts of where he was. There are people who hated him. There are so many details on a personal level of Alexander that you have nothing on when it comes to Muhammad, because Muhammad only has Quran where he's mentioned, well, not he, but where the label, the trustworthy and so on, is mentioned 4 times. 4 times in the entire Quran, 2 of which only refer to a person. And then you have the Hadiths, which are all attributed to him, where if you again look at this rationally, it would mean that somebody would have to record everything he said 24 hours 7, because there are so many hadiths of what he's supposed to have said. And you have the Sirah, which was, all these were written hundreds of years later, based on things on hearsay that people told about others over the centuries. So
You say that Muhammad's mentioned in the Quran only about 4 times, but then when you look at what the word means, the praised one, you have to ask the question again sometimes: who's it referring to? Is it actually a name? The praised one.
Could it refer to Jesus? Yes, it could.
It could be. You could refer to anybody rather than this one person that people are thinking about.
Yeah.
And Muslims would do well not to mention Alexander the Great. They really would do well to remain silent on that one.
So the question that I'm asking, are we allowed to juxtapose reality and the claims made in the Islamic texts?
Well, you can't. I mean, this goes back to when you're talking about reality and juxtaposing. You can't do that when every time something is mentioned in the Quran, it's proven to be false and a lie. When it mentions history, people in history, it's proven to be a lie. When it mentions other religious texts, it's proven to be a lie. When it mentions scientific things, it's proven to be a lie. When it mentions names and locations other than the ones I already mentioned in other religious texts, it's proven to be a lie. At what point do you not consider yourself, you know what, I've heard too many lies, I don't want to hear anymore. It can't be trusted at any level. And then when you get the defenders, so on that premise, so the premise is Islam is a lie. So you can only expect lies to defend the lies, because you can't use truth to defend a lie. So when you use the word juxtaposition, you have to use the juxtaposition of reality, which is a truth. You can't use a truth in that juxtaposition to defend the lie. That's a contradiction.
Rob, what is your summary? If you look at the claims made and the reality?
You mean in general? Sorry, I stepped away for a quick moment there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a case of, especially going back to the history thing, right, with Alexander the Great or anybody else. Yeah, I think the claim is supposed to be that, hey, if you guys believe that, well, why don't you believe Muhammad? As you quite rightly pointed out, there's much more information about those people, but we take it, or we accept it tentatively as being, likely to be the case given what we know about history. But it wouldn't be devastating if it wasn't the case, or if in fact history was mistaken. But none of that, makes it the case that Muhammad is more likely, or that we should give that more credence, and we should especially not give extraordinary or supernatural claims about hearing a voice in a cave, and then periodically over 23 years hearing voices, and this all being perfectly recorded down. So I think, for me, if we take it all the way back to those history claims, and then, as you pointed out in your debate, the very spurious and generalistic and inferred ideas about Muhammad, given the virtually no sightings and certain other words, how one comes to this, right? Once you start to look at that, how one comes to believe this, it can only be the case that you've been brought up with it, or you just repeated what's been said to you. And because it's said, multiple times and with a level of certainty, you get to believe it. And I see this a lot with people. As soon as they get to repeat things, I hear it elsewhere in other hangouts and stuff, people start to repeat what they've heard, and they'll actually start to use the words of the person they look up to. It's fascinating to see how this works when they hang around people enough times. They've never investigated themselves, and then they will start repeating what they've heard. And then they will argue as if they have, substantive point. When you come along, or I, or Tandris, or anybody else comes along and says, hang on a moment, But they don't quite know what to do because they've never really looked at any of this stuff. But they've been, in a sense, brainwashed, gullibly hypnotized into believing it. And so you get this repetitive claims that sort of go over and over again. So in terms of reality, I mean, to me, the Quran, or the claims about Quran, and in fact, after listening to you with Muhammad, is some of the best reasons to believe this is not true.
Wow, yeah. This is, I cannot copy. I wish I could do accents. Fool me once, shame on you, and fool me, you can't get fooled again. I saw this on TV and I was sitting on the floor banging my head. I couldn't believe how anybody can be that stupid. And it's true what Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And I think this is what it boils down to. This is why people believe this. This is why people will not go and question this. And this is why if I go to Muslims and I say, listen, is there anything in the Quran that is correct? They cannot find anything, but they will never admit it. They will tap dance and they will do all sorts of things, but they will never admit that there is a problem in the Quran. Never. And this is the funny thing. Why is it that they can accept all sorts of flaws by God and that everything is illogical, but not the Quran and not Muhammad? And this is the funny thing for me, this obsession with the Quran and with Muhammad. And remember, I'm still allowed. Can you believe it? I'm still on this group of the liberal Muslims United, which, I mean, I find it fascinating because for me, this is the future of Islam. If there is a future for Islam, this is it. So I'm really fascinated with what they are doing. But at the end of the day, they still maintain that there is something special about the Quran. So they are basing everything they know about their God on this book. And this for me is quite weird that somebody will go and say, well, I'm putting this book above everything else. It's a token of this God. It's a placeholder for this God. And I need to treat this book in a different way than I treat any other book. So I'm not allowed to read it the same way. I must find excuses for it no matter what I do. And this is so weird. This is so crazy.
Yep. And if there's any Muslim who wants to join us now, would be a good time. We've got a short time before we go to Discord, or maybe we'll finish early. Who knows? But if you are a Muslim and you want to listen, if you want to join us and have a quick chat here. Otherwise, obviously, you can join us on Discord after the show. And here is the link at the bottom of your screen now that's scrolling across. So I would like to chat to you about what you think is true and why you think it's true, whether it's the Quran, Muhammad, or anything else that's been discussed today or over the last few weeks. Stops, what have you got in store? Have you already got an idea of what's in store for next week?
No.
Okay,
because
good.
next week we're going to talk about Sharia, about law. It's the final week of reality. We'll have to decide what we do next month. So we're just going to run down a little bit what happened with Sharia. Where does it come from? What is it? What is it not? Oh, hang on. We've done something like this because this is when this Boma guy, this is when he came and he called and said, yeah, you guys were talking about Sharia, you were talking total nonsense. And then when I asked him, okay, could be, what is it that we said that was wrong? Well, I can't tell you that, but it was nonsense. And this must have been like a year ago when we talked about Sharia and we said a couple of things.
I still think that at some point it's worth going over some of that document, or at least discussing it with the historicity of Muhammad specifically, because you have talked about obviously the history of Islam per se, and that part most Muslims won't know about, but they will at least be at some level familiar with, or not, as the case may be, the Quran, and of course Muhammad, because without Muhammad, no Quran, right? Then it's definitely just a man-made book. If there is a Muhammad, and he's said to have done everything he said, well, then they have a stronger claim. But if you can present what you showed me, or at least some of what you showed me, then that I think would be interesting. It certainly opened my eyes, because I always took it as in it's the case, I'm going to grant that, never really looking into the historicity of Muhammad. And I think at some point, if not next week, at some point, that would be useful for viewers as well to go through some of that, because you could do a couple of shows on that probably as well if you went through it in intricate detail. Up to you.
Can do that, yeah. I mean, you know that it's there. I just need to pull it up.
Mm.
And the fear of hellfire is all that they had. And this is so true, hey? Well, I remember there was a cleric, an Islam cleric, who said, if we didn't have the fear of hellfire and we didn't have the punishment of killing for apostasy, Islam would have died long ago. It's quite funny. Why is it apostasy or apostasy?
Apostasy.
I pronounce it apostasy.
Yeah, me too. But I heard in the video now, Professor Dawkins, he said apostasy.
Did he?
I thought
Maybe he's just got a fancy English accent, but that doesn't sound right to me.
He has pronounced apostasy before, so he has used both pronunciations.
Speaking of which, I did find this amusing as well. It just came to me because you mentioned Dawkins, because in his discussion with Sabur, Cosmic Skeptic, Sabur says, I keep telling you to stay away from these new atheists. Hopefully one day you'll become a Muslim, he says to Cosmic Skeptic. These new atheists, no. You're much better than that, apparently. Because he mentioned Richard Dawkins. I don't remember what he said about Dawkins disparagingly. And, of course, the rest of them. And then Hitchens was like Goebbels, etc. But he keeps telling him to stay away because he's so much better than that.
Yeah, but they're so scared. I don't know why they're so scared of Dawkins. The funny thing is, we need to remember, Dawkins is a biologist. I don't know why people expect him to be a philosopher, because I have a lot of people who say, yeah, but his philosophical argument was wrong. Well, what the fuck? He's a biologist. The same thing with Dan Dennett. They said, yeah, but he should know that in evolution, this is. No, he's a philosopher. He's not a developmental biologist. I don't know. People are so funny.
Yeah, I think they've each had their own strengths, right? But to suggest that, Cosmic Skeptic should stay away from them or not follow them or whatever the case is. Well, take a leaf out of your own book, right? Stop following somebody who may not even have existed 1,400 years ago, who hasn't said anything demonstrably true or substantive, and start thinking for yourself. But then again, that's a mountain to climb that probably he's unable to do anyway. It just triggered a thought because of mentioning Dawkins. So I don't know if there's anything else in the chat. There certainly doesn't seem to be.
No, there's nothing. It's funny that I thought people had heard more about the history of Islam, that I would get a lot more uphill.
No, but they haven't, though. That's the thing. They haven't. And to the degree they have, obviously, like you say, they've got to just say, no, it's not true. Or present your evidence, and even though you present evidence, I'm not going to accept it, right? Something like that. What else are you going to say?
Okay.
So, maybe Hadith of the day. See who wants to join us on Discord. Maybe a Hadith of the day and finish a few minutes early, and see who wants to join us on Discord.
And the Hadith of the day, I don't know if this is quite weird, but this is exactly the side topic that we were talking about in the Quran today, because it's in Bukhari volume 984, number 63, and it's narrated by Abdullah. Now, I need to be careful. As if I am looking at the Prophet while he was speaking about one of the prophets whose people have beaten and wounded him. And he was wiping the blood off his face, saying, O Lord, forgive my people as they do not know. That's it.
What is it they don't know?
I only know one person who said, forgive my people as they do not know. Forgive them because they know not what they are doing, or something.
Yes, that's right.
And that was, I think, Jesus on the cross or something.
Correct. Yeah. But what is this one? What are they asking forgiveness for here? What is it they don't know?
The prophets, while he was speaking about one of the prophets whose people, I think he was talking about Jesus, whose people have beaten and wounded him. And as he was wiping the blood of his face, saying, "Oh Lord, forgive me." So this is a direct reference to Jesus in the Hadith.
It
As
sounds
if I'm
certainly
looking at
sounds-
Muhammad while he was speaking about one of the prophets whose people have beaten and wounded him.
still vague, but I think you could certainly suggest that that's a reference to Jesus. But if that's the case and they beat him, what do they think happened after that? What, did they just let him go, or?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
But then again, hey, who are we to quote hadiths as reliable sources, right? If you're an economist, you can neatly sidestep that. Forget that you need some hadiths to make sense of some things, but that's a small price to pay to extricate yourself from having to deal with or defend the hadiths, because they make the Quran look like, Alice in Wonderland. But on that note, I
Brilliant.
guess, can we say?
Okay, ladies, gents, others, it's been a pleasure. It's been nice. It's been interesting, fascinating. And this time I actually enjoyed my homework, looking up some of the things. And we shall meet again next Friday, if my broken arm allows. Shit. Yes, as I tell you, this is so terrible.
Have a
You
good
heal?
bank holiday weekend, everybody.
And
Yep, you
don't
too.
let anybody tell you that you were born with 2 hands and 2 arms. That is hopelessly overrated. No, you are not. You have 1.5, because I broke my right arm. Okay. Now, do you know how many things I cannot do with my left? Now, as a kid, a couple of months ago, I broke my arm when I was about 7 or 8 or something. And, within a couple of months, I could do everything with the left. And then when I took the cast off, I was ambidextrous, no problem. But now I can't use my right hand. I can hardly do anything. I can't even pull up my socks. I can't, like trivial things. I cannot do them because I'm missing my right arm. So don't let people tell you you've got 2 hands and 2 arms. No, you've got 1.5. If you're right-handed and your right hand goes missing, my goodness, it's terrible. So I hope it's and they say that this is going to take 6 weeks, so I'll just have to be patient.
Well, wishing you a recovery and
Thank you. See you guys next time. That
time
was the level of my frustration for today.
anyone
All right,
still
guys. See you in the in the in the in the Discord, and otherwise see you next week here on the
good
Jim
night all.
and
Thank you.
Tonic Show.
Thanks to everybody. And
Good night.